Welcome to History Teller YT, your gateway to the untold stories of the past. Today, we embark on a journey through the world of the samurai, Japan's legendary warriors whose swords, honor, and philosophy shaped an entire civilization. From the rise of the samurai in feudal Japan, through the era of shoguns, the code of Bushido, and the tension between isolation and modernization, to the Meiji Restoration and Japan's emergence onto the global stage. This story spans centuries of honor, warfare, and culture. We'll explore not just battles and politics, but the enduring ethics, art, and philosophy that continue to influence modern Japan and even the world today. From epic wars to moral dilemmas, from swordsmanship to literature and cinema, the legacy of the samurai is alive. And in the next 2 hours, you'll experience it all. So sit back, relax, and let History Teller YT guide you through the complete saga of the samurai. A story of courage, discipline, honor, and timeless legacy. In the 8th and 9th centuries, Japan stood divided not by geography, but by power and pride. The emperor sat in the capital of Heian-kyo, modern Kyoto, surrounded by poets, priests, and courtiers who cherished beauty and ceremony. But beyond the glittering palaces, Japan was cracking. Powerful clans, once sworn to protect the throne, began to see the emperor's rule as little more than paper authority. The land was vast, its rice fields fertile, and its wealth ripe for those strong enough to seize it. Local governors and noble families started hiring private warriors, skilled men who could protect estates, collect taxes, and fight off bandits or rival clans. These warriors weren't yet called samurai, but they were the spark of something legendary. They lived by the sword, for the sword was survival. Far from the capital's art and poetry, these fighters forged a culture of loyalty, discipline, and silence. Traits born from necessity, not philosophy. As the countryside descended into constant skirmishes, Japan's fate shifted away from imperial hands. The emperor's inability to control distant provinces gave rise to military families. The Taira, the Minamoto, and many smaller clans who would soon paint Japan's history with blood and honor. By the 10th century, the old aristocratic order was dying, replaced by something harsher, something far more disciplined. A new class of warriors, bound by loyalty rather than lineage, began to rise. They were not yet legends, but soon the world would know their name: samurai. By the 10th and 11th centuries, Japan had become a land of divided loyalties. The central court weakened as the countryside thrived under the control of local daimyo, feudal lords who ruled through might, not decree. These lords maintained their power through a growing warrior class that pledged their loyalty in exchange for land, honor, and protection. It was here that the spirit of Bushido, the way of the warrior, began to take shape, though it was not yet written. Loyalty to one's master became the highest virtue, even greater than life itself. The Taira and Minamoto clans, both descendants of imperial lineage, emerged as two dominant forces. The rivalry between them was more than politics. It was destiny. The Taira clan, skilled in naval warfare, commanded influence at court, while the Minamoto, forged by hardship, mastered the art of battle in the fields. As the two powers grew, the empire trembled. Civil war loomed like a storm cloud over Japan's fragile peace. When the Genpei War erupted in 1180, it became a clash not only of armies but of ideologies, the old world of courtly control versus the new order of the sword. For 5 long years, Japan was consumed by fire and steel. Villages burned, rivers turned red, and heroes rose and fell as fast as the changing tides. And when the smoke cleared, the Minamoto stood victorious. Minamoto no Yoritamo, the first shogun, declared a new age, the Kamakura shogunate. The emperor still sat on his throne, but power, real power, now belonged to the samurai. The establishment of the Kamakura shogunate in 1192 marked a new dawn, not of peace, but of order. The samurai had triumphed over aristocratic decadence. The emperor remained a divine figure, yet his voice no longer commanded obedience. Instead, it was the shogun, Japan's supreme military ruler, who dictated the rhythm of the nation. Under Yoritomo's rule, a new political system emerged, one that balanced feudal loyalty, strict hierarchy, and unbreakable discipline. For the first time, Japan was united under the sword rather than the scroll. Samurai families governed provinces, collected taxes, and dispensed justice in their lord's name. In exchange, they pledged absolute loyalty, even to the point of death. This relationship between master and vassal became sacred, cementing the foundation of feudal Japan. The code that would later be called Bushido, the way of the warrior, was slowly taking form through lived experience, courage, honor, loyalty, and death before disgrace. But this new order came at a price. The samurai who once fought for survival now found themselves bound by duty. Their swords, once symbols of independence, became tools of obedience. It was this discipline that allowed Japan to rise from chaos into one of the most structured societies in world history. The age of the samurai had begun, and their legend was only beginning to take shape. The samurai were not just warriors. They were living philosophies carved in flesh and tempered by battle. After the rise of the Kamakura shogunate, the warrior class needed more than strength. They needed a moral compass to hold the fractured nation together. Thus began the shaping of Bushido, the sacred path of honor that defined what it meant to live and die as a samurai. It wasn't written in books or scrolls at first. It was lived through generations of struggle, loyalty, and blood. The code blended ancient Shinto beliefs, Buddhist attachment, and Confucian ethics, forming a system that valued inner calm as much as outer strength. A samurai's life was measured not by victories, but by how he lived and faced death. To act dishonorably, to betray a lord, flee from battle, or show cowardice was worse than dying itself. In the samurai's mind, death was not an ending. It was a release from shame. That is why they often carried two swords, the katana and the wakizashi, one for the enemy and one for themselves, should they ever fail to uphold their honor. The samurai's discipline was unshakable. Every action, from how they bowed to how they spoke, reflected the order and balance they believed in. They saw themselves not as killers, but as guardians of morality. Their blades were extensions of their souls, polished daily, revered, and never drawn without reason. It was said that a samurai who mastered his mind could master his sword, and through that mastery, control his destiny. Bushido was not about victory, it was about virtue. To the samurai, a man's worth was defined not by how long he lived, but how honorably he died. As the centuries passed, the unwritten code of the samurai began to take form in words and teachings, eventually known as the 7 Virtues of Bushido, a philosophy that became the beating heart of Japan's warrior spirit. The first was ji, righteousness, to make the right decision at any cost, even if it led to death. A samurai's judgment had to be pure, never tainted by greed or emotion. The second was yu, courage, not reckless bravery, but the strength to do what is right, even when fear whispered otherwise. Then came jin, compassion, a reminder that even in war, mercy was not weakness but balance. Samurai were expected to protect the weak, to see themselves as guardians, not conquerors. Rei, respect, followed. Every act, even killing, was to be done with dignity. The samurai bowed to enemies before battle and to their lords afterward, showing that honor was greater than hatred. Makoto, honesty, and Meo, honor, taught that lies corroded the soul, and a samurai's word was his bond. Once given, it could never be broken. Finally came Chugi, loyalty, the unbreakable bond between master and retainer. A samurai existed to serve, his life entwined with his lord's fate. Betrayal was unthinkable, and if a master fell, many samurai followed him into death willingly. Together, these virtues formed the invisible armor that was stronger than any steel. They made the samurai feared in battle, respected in peace, and eternal in legend. It was this moral discipline, not their swords, that made the samurai the most feared and revered warriors of their time. To a samurai, life without honor was a shadow, empty, meaningless, and unbearable. When faced with shame or failure, the ultimate act of loyalty and courage was seppuku, ritual suicide by the sword. Though unthinkable to outsiders, to the samurai, it was the purest expression of Bushido. It was not a punishment, but a purification, a way to cleanse dishonor and leave the world with one's integrity intact. The ritual was precise and sacred. A samurai would bathe, dress in white robes, write a final poem reflecting his state of mind, and kneel before his blade. A trusted companion, the kaishakunin, stood ready to end his suffering swiftly once the act began. It was a dance between duty and death, performed with serenity, not fear. For in that final moment, the samurai achieved freedom from shame, from life, from the burden of dishonor. Such devotion to honor created both awe and terror. Commoners respected samurai as symbols of courage, yet feared their cold resolve. To live under a samurai's rule meant living under a code that valued morality above mercy. But it also gave Japan something priceless, a sense of discipline and identity that would shape its destiny for centuries. Bushido turned warriors into philosophers and death into an art form. It gave meaning to violence and order to chaos. And those centuries would pass. Its spirit would echo through Japan's culture, from its poetry and politics to its soldiers and citizens. By the mid-13th century, Japan had been under the rule of the Kamakura shogunate for nearly 100 years. The samurai had become both the shield and the spine of the nation, their discipline unmatched, their loyalty absolute. But even the proudest warrior could not have imagined the storm that was about to cross the sea. The might of the Mongol Empire, led by Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan. At its height, the Mongol Empire stretched from the frozen steppes of Russia to the deserts of Persia, swallowing entire civilizations in its path. To Kublai Khan, Japan was not a mystery. It was an opportunity, a jewel waiting to be claimed by the empire that called itself invincible. In 1266, the Khan sent envoys demanding Japan's surrender. The shogunate, confident in its divine protection and the valor of its warriors, refused. This insult would not go unanswered. 7 years later, in 1274, a Mongol fleet carrying nearly 30,000 soldiers, Mongols, Chinese, and Koreans, sailed across the Tsushima Strait. They landed first on Tsushima Island, where they unleashed a fury unlike anything Japan had ever faced. Samurai warriors, used to one-on-one combat and ritual duels, suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by organized volleys of arrows, thunderous drums, and explosive firebombs, new weapons unknown to Japan. The samurai fought bravely, but were forced to retreat as the Mongols pushed toward Hakata Bay on Kyushu. Just when defeat seemed certain, the heavens intervened. a violent storm struck, tearing through the Mongol fleet. Hundreds of ships sank, thousands drowned, and the survivors fled back across the sea. The Japanese saw this as divine intervention. The kamikaze, the wind of the gods, a sign that the gods themselves protected their islands. Yet the samurai knew the war was not over. The storm had saved them once, but the Mongols would return. After the failed invasion of 1274, Japan did not rest. The shogunate ordered massive coastal defenses to be built along Hakata Bay, stone walls stretching miles, ready to repel the next assault. Samurai families spent years preparing, sharpening swords and hearts alike. Across the sea, Kublai Khan raged. He had lost face, men, and ships, but not ambition. He would avenge the humiliation of the Divine Wind. In 1281, the Khan launched an even larger invasion, the greatest naval assault the world had ever seen up to that time. Two vast fleets, one from Korea with 40,000 men and another from China with 100,000 more, converged toward Japan. For weeks, the samurai held their coastal lines, charging fearlessly into battle, boarding enemy ships and fighting in desperate night raids. The Mongols, disciplined and ruthless, fought back with gunpowder bombs, crossbows, and tactics alien to Japanese warfare. Despite being outnumbered many times over, the samurai refused to yield. Each warrior saw the battle not as a struggle for land, but as a sacred duty, a chance to fulfill Bushido, to die with honor if needed. For nearly 2 months, Japan resisted. And then, once again, the sky darkened. In August of 1281, another colossal typhoon struck, fiercer than the last. Waves the size of mountains tore through the Mongol armada. Ships splintered like toys, soldiers drowned by the tens of thousands. Only a few survivors crawled back to the mainland. The kamikaze had returned. The Japanese rejoiced, seeing it as proof that their divine destiny was real. The Mongol threat was erased, and the samurai's faith in their gods and their own honor became unshakable. The world's greatest empire had been defeated not just by nature, but by the spirit of a people who refused to kneel. Though Japan had survived, the victory brought with it a quiet curse. The Mongols had been destroyed, but at an unbearable cost. The shogunate's treasury was nearly empty. Thousands of samurai who had fought bravely now returned home expecting reward, land, wealth, or titles. Yet there was none to give. The invaders had been foreign, so there were no conquered territories to distribute. The samurai had defended their homeland, but gained nothing in return. Resentment began to fester beneath the surface. Samurai who had once pledged blind loyalty to the shogunate now questioned their leaders. Without war, many became ronin, masterless samurai, wandering the land, their swords still sharp but their purpose fading. The Kamakura government, weakened by financial strain and political corruption, started losing control. The same code of Bushido that had united Japan in war now threatened to divide it in peace. Yet even in their hardship, the samurai's legend grew. The story of their defiance against the Mongols spread across Asia. Japan became known as the land protected by the gods, and the samurai became symbols of unbreakable courage. The kamikaze would echo through the centuries, even into the modern age, where future warriors would once again claim to fight under its divine wind. For now, though, Japan stood exhausted but undefeated. The samurai had saved their nation, and in doing so, sealed their destiny as both heroes and victims of their own honor. After the Mongol invasions, Japan stood bloodied but proud. The divine winds had saved the islands, but not the Kamakura shogunate. The government that once commanded fear now suffered from corruption, greed, and distrust. The samurai, unpaid and restless, began to see cracks in the system that once united them under honor. The shoguns grew weak, their ministers scheming for personal power while the emperor, still a distant symbol, remained sidelined. Beneath this fragile order, the seeds of rebellion were taking root. By the early 14th century, the Emperor Go-Daigo dared to dream of restoring imperial rule, an idea that seemed both noble and dangerous. His plan to overthrow the shogunate ignited a chain of events that would plunge Japan into chaos. The samurai, once loyal to the Kamakura government, began to divide. Some fought for the emperor's cause, seeking glory and justice. Others clung to the shogunate, defending the system that had given them purpose. The land once again echoed with the clash of steel. In 1333, Go-Daigo's forces, led by the brilliant General Nida Yashisada, stormed Kamakura, setting fire to the city and bringing the shogunate to its knees. The emperor's dream seemed realized. The imperial banner once again flew over Japan. Yet power, once tasted, is never easily shared. Among Go-Daigo's allies was a cunning warrior named Ashikaga Takauji, who had first supported the emperor but soon turned against him. Takauji saw weakness in Go-Daigo's rule and ambition in his own reflection. In a stunning betrayal, he seized Kyoto, installed a new emperor, and declared himself shogun. Thus began the Ashikaga shogunate, marking the start of the Muromachi period, an era of art, war, and shifting loyalties. The Ashikaga rulers brought with them not only war, but also an unexpected renaissance of culture. From their capital in Kyoto's Muromachi district, they patronized artists, poets, monks, and craftsmen, giving birth to the refined aesthetics that would forever define Japanese identity. The world of the samurai, once bound only to blood and steel, now found harmony in brushstrokes, gardens, and tea. The influence of Zen Buddhism grew stronger than ever, teaching that enlightenment could be found in simplicity, silence, and balance. Samurai began to meditate in stone gardens, seeking calm before battle. The same hands that wielded blades learned to pour tea with grace, practicing the way of tea, Chado. The famous No theater emerged, combining elegance, tragedy, and symbolism. Every movement deliberate, every mask a reflection of emotion suppressed beneath discipline. Yet this beauty was born from instability. The Ashikaga shogunate ruled through fragile alliances and constant fear. Rival clans grew bolder, and regional daimyos gained more autonomy, building private armies and defying central control. Beneath the quiet poetry and painted screens, tension brewed like a storm. The balance between culture and chaos was delicate, and it was beginning to tip. Still, the samurai of this era embodied the paradox of Japan itself. Warriors of death who nurtured beauty, destroyers who built temples, and men who could write poetry between battles. Their world was a theater of contrasts, where elegance danced with violence, and every act of creation stood against the certainty of war. By the mid-15th century, the Ashikaga shogunate's fragile peace began to crumble completely. Power struggles between rival clans reached their breaking point. The most devastating conflict erupted in 1467, the Unin War. What began as a dispute over succession turned into a nationwide catastrophe. Kyoto, once a city of art and temples, became a battlefield of ash and blood. Mansions burned, nobles fled, and the capital, once the heart of Japanese refinement, was reduced to ruins. The Ashikaga shoguns, powerless to stop the destruction, became shadows of authority. As the smoke cleared, Japan entered one of the most chaotic periods in its history. The Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States era. Samurai warlords, known as daimyos, carved up the country into fiefdoms, each dreaming of becoming the ultimate ruler. Loyalty faded, replaced by cunning alliances and betrayals. The code of Bushido remained, but survival often demanded that honor band. Despite the bloodshed, this era gave rise to legends, names that would echo across centuries. Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, men destined to reunite Japan through fire and steel. But for now, the land was fractured, and the samurai, once united under the shogun's banner, became both conquerors and victims of endless war. The Ashikaga era ended not with a battle cry, but with silence. The silence of temples destroyed, of honor lost, and of a country waiting for a savior strong enough to restore order. The beauty that once flourished under the Muromachi sky now lay buried beneath the ashes of ambition. The year was 1467. The once great capital of Kyoto lay in ruins, a ghost of its former beauty. From its ashes, Japan plunged into a century of chaos, known as the Sengoku Jidai, the Age of Warring States. For more than 100 years, the islands burned under the banners of countless warlords, each seeking power, glory, and the dream of unification. The Ashikaga shogunate, stripped of authority, could do nothing but watch as their empires splintered into pieces. Across the provinces, daimyos, regional lords with armies of samurai, ruled their territories like kings. Castles rose atop hills, rivers ran red with battle, and betrayal became as common as breathing. The code of Bushido endured, but it evolved. In this new age, honor often bent to ambition. Some samurai still lived by the old virtues of loyalty and sacrifice. Others wielded cunning like a second blade, believing survival was the highest form of honor. War became an art form. The sound of drums, the flutter of banners, and the gleam of armor became Japan's new rhythm. Alliances formed at sunrise and were broken by sunset. Every man dreamed of conquering Kyoto, of restoring the shogunate under his rule. But for most, the Sengoku era was not a dream. It was a nightmare. Farmers became soldiers, villages became graves, and children grew up knowing only the taste of smoke and steel. Yet, even amid ruin, heroes were born. The stage of chaos was about to give rise to three names that would change Japan forever: Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. They would not just fight wars. They would shape the soul of Japan itself. In the mid-16th century, one man rose above the endless tide of war. His name was Oda Nobunaga, a ruthless and brilliant daimyo from Owari province. Born into a minor clan, Nobunaga was seen as erratic and unrefined, but behind his wild nature burned a mind of terrifying genius. He looked upon Japan's shattered landscape and saw not despair, but opportunity. Nobunaga was a new kind of warrior, bold, unpredictable, and utterly without fear. He embraced new technologies, especially the arquebus, a matchlock gun brought by Portuguese traders in 1543. While traditional samurai scorned firearms as dishonorable, Nobunaga saw their potential. He trained his troops in formations never seen before, combining discipline with deadly efficiency. In 1560, at the Battle of Okahazama, Nobunaga faced a massive army led by Imagawa Yoshimoto, an enemy 10 times his size. As a storm raged, Nobunaga struck with lightning speed, launching a surprise attack that annihilated Yoshimoto's forces. From that day, Japan knew the name Oda Nobunaga, the man who fought like thunder and ruled like fire. Over the next 2 decades, Nobunaga's forces marched across central Japan. He conquered Kyoto, broke the power of rival daimyos, and crushed rebellious Buddhist sects who dared to oppose him. His vision was clear: to unify Japan under one rule, one sword, one destiny. But his rise came at a cost. To some, he was a hero; to others, a monster. His cruelty was legendary, his ambition limitless. And though he burned with the fire of conquest, that same fire would one day consume him. By 1582, Oda Nobunaga had brought most of Japan under his iron control. He stood on the edge of uniting the nation, but fate, as always, had other plans. While staying at the Honnoji Temple in Kyoto, Nobunaga was betrayed by one of his closest generals, Akechi Mitsuhide. Without warning, Mitsuhide's army surrounded the temple, trapping his master inside. Outnumbered and unarmed, Nobunaga chose death over capture. As flames engulfed the temple, he performed seppuku, ending his life and leaving his empire leaderless. His death shocked Japan. The dream of unification seemed shattered again. But from the chaos, one of Nobunaga's most loyal generals, a man of humble origins, stepped forward to finish what his master had begun. His name was Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi was the son of a peasant, born with no title, no land, and no right to wear the sword of a samurai. Yet through wit, loyalty, and unmatched charisma, he rose from servant to supreme commander. Under his leadership, Japan would finally find unity, not through terror, but through diplomacy, brilliance, and sheer willpower. Though Nobunaga's reign ended in fire, his legacy endured. He was the first to envision a unified Japan ruled by strength and order. His ruthless ambition broke the old feudal barriers and shattered centuries of division. To this day, he is remembered as the Demon King of the Sixth Heaven, a figure both feared and revered. He had set the stage for the final act, a world where one man would achieve what countless had died trying to do: bring peace to a land built on war. In the war-torn fields of Owari Province, sometime around 1537, a frail boy named Hayao Shimaru was born to a peasant family. His father was an Ishigaru, a low-ranking foot soldier, and his family owned nothing but the clothes they wore. The boy's hands were made for labor, not for holding a sword. Yet destiny often begins in the most unlikely places. The child who would one day rule Japan started his journey barefoot, carrying straw sandals for men who wielded blades. From a young age, Hayao Shimaru was clever and restless. He could not accept the limits that society placed on him. In a time when birth defined destiny, he believed that talent could break through walls thicker than castle stone. He left his village, traveling from one lord to another, offering his service wherever he could. People mocked his small stature and humble origin, calling him monkey, but his wit and quick mind soon caught the attention of a rising warlord, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga saw something unusual in the young servant: loyalty mixed with genius. He promoted Hayao Shimaru, who now called himself Hideyoshi, through the ranks. While most samurai sought glory through the sword, Hideyoshi mastered the art of strategy and persuasion. He could read people as easily as others read scrolls. Within a few years, he had become one of Nobunaga's most trusted generals. When Nobunaga dreamed of uniting Japan, Hideyoshi became his right hand, the man who built castles, organized armies, and calmed rebellions not just with force, but with cunning diplomacy. Hideyoshi's rise from servant to general became a legend in itself, a symbol that willpower could bend the rigid class walls of feudal Japan. When Nobunaga fell to betrayal in 1582, Japan trembled. Power fragmented once again, as Nobunaga's generals and rivals fought for control. But Hideyoshi moved with astonishing speed. Within days, he avenged his master by crushing Akechi Mitsuhide at the Battle of Yamazaki. In the aftermath, he gathered Nobunaga's former allies, using charm and shrewd alliances to claim the leadership of the Oda clan. Hideyoshi was not of noble blood, so many daimyos refused to recognize him. But what he lacked in pedigree, he made up for in brilliance. Over the next decade, he launched a series of military campaigns that reshaped Japan. He conquered western provinces, subdued rebellious lords, and brought the great island of Kyushu under his control. Through both diplomacy and war, he achieved what no one before him had done. He unified almost the entire nation. In 1590, after the siege of Odawara Castle, the last major resistance, the powerful Hojo clan surrendered. For the first time in over a century, Japan stood under one rule. Hideyoshi established his headquarters in Osaka Castle, an enormous fortress that symbolized his vision of power and peace. But Hideyoshi was more than a conqueror. He sought to reshape society itself. He conducted the Great Sword Hunt, disarming peasants to prevent rebellion, and cementing the samurai class as Japan's only warriors. He also introduced a rigid social hierarchy, ensuring that no one could rise from peasant to samurai as he had done, ironically closing the path he had once walked. To maintain peace, he banned private wars and ordered land surveys to stabilize taxation. Yet beneath this calm order, a shadow grew. Hideyoshi, now called Taiko, began to dream beyond Japan's shores. His ambitions stretched across seas to China and Korea, a vision that would lead him from unifier to invader. By the late 1590s, Toyotomi Hideyoshi stood as the most powerful man in East Asia. He ruled with absolute authority, his word law, his armies vast. Yet power, once attained, has a way of consuming its master. Hideyoshi's vision of peace began to twist into a dream of conquest. Believing himself chosen by heaven to expand Japan's glory, he launched an invasion of Korea in 1592, demanding passage through the peninsula to China. At first, his armies advanced swiftly, capturing cities and stunning the world with Japan's military might. But the campaign soon turned into a disaster. Korean resistance, aided by the Chinese Ming forces, struck back fiercely. Japanese supply lines collapsed, morale plummeted, and countless soldiers died far from home. The dream of a Japanese empire beyond the sea crumbled into mud and blood. Hideyoshi, aging and sick, grew increasingly paranoid. He executed trusted generals, exiled advisors, and built golden temples in a desperate attempt to immortalize his legacy. In 1598, on his deathbed, he gathered his surviving allies and begged them to protect his young son, Hideyori, until he came of age. With his final breath, he urged them to keep Japan united and peaceful. But history is cruel to last wishes. After Hideyoshi's death, his empire began to fracture. His loyal generals, the same men who had once sworn to protect his legacy, turned against one another. Among them stood a man of quiet patience and iron will, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who waited in the shadows for his moment to rise. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the peasant who rose to rule Japan, died as one of its greatest legends. His life proved that power could come from anywhere, but it also warned that ambition, left unchecked, can consume everything it creates. In a quiet province of Mikawa, 1543, a child was born into the troubled Matsudaira clan. His name was Takechiyo, later known to history as Tokugawa Ieyasu. From the moment of his birth, his life was marked by turmoil. His father's small domain lay trapped between two great powers, the Oda to the west and the Imagawa to the east. When he was just 6, Ieyasu was taken hostage, a common practice among warlords to ensure loyalty. His childhood was spent under the shadow of fear, captivity, and shifting allegiances. But captivity taught him patience, the kind of patience that would define his life. He studied his captors, learned their politics, absorbed their tactics. When most boys his age dreamed of glory, Ieyasu dreamed of survival. In those years of quiet observation, the boy became a strategist. He understood that in an age of chaos, sometimes waiting was the greatest weapon of all. When he was finally freed, Ieyasu aligned himself with Oda Nobunaga, whose ruthless brilliance was carving through Japan's fractured map. He quickly proved his worth, disciplined, cautious, and utterly reliable. Unlike the flamboyant Nobunaga or the daring Hideyoshi, Ieyasu's power came from control. He built strong alliances, disciplined armies, and a reputation as a man who could be trusted, even by enemies. As Nobunaga rose, so did Ieyasu. He conquered Mikawa, secured his family lands, and modernized his army with firearms and new tactics. He wasn't the loudest general, nor the most feared, but he was the one who never made a reckless move. When chaos erupted across Japan after Nobunaga's death, Ieyasu remained calm, watching the pieces fall, calculating his next move, like a wolf waiting for the herd to tire. Little did the world know, this quiet wolf would soon outlive them all. When Toyotomi Hideyoshi died in 1598, his young son Hideyori was left too small to rule, and Japan stood on a knife's edge once more. A council of 5 regents, including Tokugawa Ieyasu, was appointed to protect the child and preserve the unity Hideyoshi had built. But ambition rarely sleeps. Ieyasu, now a seasoned statesman, began to consolidate power, forging alliances, marrying his family into rival clans, and gathering support among daimyos who feared instability. His rival, Ishida Mitsunari, saw this as betrayal and rallied the Toyotomi loyalists against him. Japan split into 2 massive armies, east and west, and a stage was set for one of the greatest battles in its history, Sekigahara, October 21st, 1600. That morning, fog rolled across the valley. Over 160,000 men stood ready, banners fluttering, drums echoing, swords gleaming with dew. Ieyasu led the Eastern Army. Mitsunari commanded the Western Coalition. The clash was fierce and chaotic, the thunder of matchlock guns shaking the earth. Betrayal turned the tide. Several Western generals secretly defected to Ieyasu mid-battle, flipping the outcome in a single, stunning moment. By noon, the field was soaked in blood. Mitsunari's army was crushed, and the dream of Toyotomi rule was dead. Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara was more than military triumph. It was divine confirmation. The gods, it seemed, had chosen him to restore order to Japan. After the battle, Ieyasu moved swiftly. He executed rival leaders, rewarded loyal daimyos, and began reshaping the political landscape. Within 3 years, he was granted the title Sei Taishogun, the commander-in-chief of a nation, by the emperor himself. The Tokugawa shogunate was born, and Japan would never be the same again. In 1603, Tokugawa Ieyasu formally established his government in Edo, a small fishing village that would one day become Tokyo. But Ieyasu was not content with power alone. He wanted permanence. He understood what Nobunaga and Hideyoshi had not, that swords could conquer, but only structure could preserve. He created a political system that would last for 265 years. Daimyos were divided into 3 ranks Fudai, Tozuma, and Shimpan, each was carefully balanced to prevent rebellion. The alternate attendance system required lords to spend alternate years in Edo, their families held there as hostages, a brilliant blend of loyalty and control. He stabilized the economy, encouraged agriculture, and limited the power of Christian missionaries, fearing their influence could undermine loyalty to the shogun. The Bushido Code was refined and enforced more strictly than ever, emphasizing loyalty, obedience, and honor, not only in battle, but in everyday conduct. As he aged, Ieyasu retired, but never truly stepped away. He ruled from behind the scenes, ensuring his lineage would endure. He built Nikko Tashogu's shrine, where he would later be enshrined as a god. When he died in 1616, Japan was finally united and at peace, something it had not known for centuries. The Tokugawa shogunate became more than a government. It was a living system of control, honor, and stability. Under it, Japan entered its most peaceful era, but also its most isolated. The seeds of that isolation, planted by Ieyasu, would grow into a wall that shielded Japan from the world for over 250 years. When Tokugawa Ieyasu established his rule in 1603, he did not merely end war. He designed a machine of stability that would govern Japan for more than 2.5 centuries. This new government, known as the Bakufu, was a military dictatorship cloaked in ritual and law. Yet beneath its rigid surface, it brought the one thing people had longed for: peace. The Tokugawa rulers crafted a society based on absolute hierarchy and control. Every person had a defined place, from the emperor, who was revered but powerless, to the peasant who tilled the rice fields. At the top stood the shogun, the supreme military ruler. Beneath him were the daimyos, each ruling their domains under strict watch. The samurai served these lords, while merchants, artisans, and farmers formed the rest of society. To prevent rebellion, the shogunate introduced the Sengoku system. Every daimyo was required to maintain 2 residences, one in his home province and one in Edo, the capital. Every other year, he had to travel to Edo with a grand procession, leaving his family there as hostages when he returned home. This constant movement drained the daimyo's wealth and prevented them from amassing power for war. Roads, post stations, and then sprang up across Japan to support these journeys. The Takedo Road, linking Edo to Kyoto, became the lifeline of the nation, a highway not of soldiers, but of culture, merchants, and communication. For the first time in centuries, Japan was connected, not by conquest, but by infrastructure and peace. Under this strict order, Japan flourished, not with war, but with art, discipline, and a deep sense of stability that shaped its soul for generations. The peace that Ieyasu and his descendants built brought a strange new challenge. What does a warrior do when there are no wars left to fight? The samurai, once the fiercest warriors in Japan, found themselves in a new world where swords were more symbolic than practical. Their battles now were against boredom, poverty, and the decay of purpose. Samurai were forbidden from engaging in trade or manual labor. They received fixed stipends from their lords, often in rice, which they could convert to money. Over time, inflation and mismanagement eroded their income, and many low-ranking samurai struggled to survive. Yet, the code of Bushido demanded that they live with dignity, loyalty, and restraint. As the sword lost its necessity, education became the new weapon. Samurai were expected to study literature, philosophy, and the arts. The Confucian values of loyalty, filial piety, and self-discipline were drilled into them. Many became teachers, bureaucrats, or poets. Their swords remained, polished and revered, but they were now symbols of identity, not instruments of war. Some samurai, disillusioned by peace, turned into ronin, masterless warriors who drifted from place to place. Their lives inspired countless stories and plays, the most famous being Chishingura, the tale of the 47 ronin who avenged their lord and then committed seppuku to preserve their honor. These legends kept the warrior spirit alive even in times of peace. Thus, the Tokugawa era redefined the samurai, from warriors to scholars, from conquerors to keepers of tradition. Their swords might have been silent, but their influence echoed in the moral and cultural backbone of Japan. While the samurai adjusted to their new roles, another transformation was unfolding across Japan. With peace came prosperity, and with prosperity came art. The Tokugawa peace gave birth to one of the most vibrant cultural periods in Japanese history, the Edo period. Cities flourished. Edo, once a swampy fishing village, grew into a bustling metropolis of over 1 million people, one of the largest cities in the world. Kyoto and Osaka became centers of art, theater, and trade. As travel became safer, people from all walks of life mingled in marketplaces, festivals, and tea houses. The common people, merchants, artisans, and entertainers began shaping a culture of their own. Kabuki theater rose as the voice of the people, blending drama, dance, and music into spectacular performances that celebrated love, revenge, and rebellion. Ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world, captured the beauty of fleeting moments, elegant courtesans, powerful actors, and serene landscapes. Artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige turned woodblock prints into masterpieces admired even in the West centuries later. Education spread widely. Printing flourished and literacy rates soared. People read novels like The Tale of the Eight Dogs and guidebooks for travelers along the Takeido Road. Tea ceremonies, calligraphy, and flower arrangement, once exclusive to the elite, became part of everyday life. Underneath the surface, however, the rigid hierarchy remained. Merchants, despite their wealth, were looked down upon. Farmers were overtaxed, and samurai often struggled with pride versus poverty. Yet for all its contradictions, Edo Japan was a land of harmony, disciplined, beautiful, and deeply introspective. The Tokugawa peace had turned Japan into a self-contained universe, polished, stable, and proud. But beyond its shores, the world was changing fast, and soon, that world would come knocking on Japan's closed gates. By the early 17th century, the Tokugawa shogunate had established control over Japan, and for over 2 centuries, the country experienced relative peace. Yet this stability came with a policy as strict as it was unusual, the policy of Sengoku, or closed country. Tokugawa rulers, wary of foreign influence, particularly from Europe, sought to limit contact with the outside world. They feared Christianity, the ambitions of colonial powers, and the destabilizing effect of global trade. In 1635, the shogunate issued edicts banning Japanese citizens from traveling abroad and restricting foreigners from entering Japan. Only a handful of traders from China, Korea, and the Netherlands were allowed to operate in the port of Nagasaki under strict supervision. Missionaries were expelled, and Japanese Christians faced persecution, forced to renounce their faith or face execution. The samurai, now guardians of peace rather than conquerors, became enforcers of this strict policy, patrolling the coastlines and monitoring ports. Life inside Japan became highly regimented. Daimyos were kept under the watchful eye of Edo, their lands strictly monitored, and travel was controlled. This isolation allowed internal stability to flourish. Cities grew, commerce expanded, and culture thrived without foreign interference. Literature, theater, and art reached new heights. The samurai focused on administration and education. Peasants continued to work the fertile rice fields, and merchants accumulated wealth, carefully navigating the strict social hierarchy. Yet, isolation was a double-edged sword. While it protected Japan from colonial conquest, it also stunted technological advancement compared to Europe. Firearms remained basic, navigation knowledge was limited, and outside ideas trickled in only slowly. This carefully guarded bubble of stability would endure for over 200 years, but the outside world was advancing rapidly, and Japan's first encounter with global powers was about to arrive. In the mid-19th century, Japan's self-imposed isolation faced its first real test. Western powers, having undergone industrial revolutions and expanding empires, began pressing Japan to open its ports for trade. In 1853, a small American fleet arrived in Edo Bay, commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry, aboard massive steam-powered ships. These vessels, black with smoke and iron, were unlike anything the Japanese had ever seen. Enormous, modern, and intimidating. Perry's mission was simple: open Japan to trade with the United States, or face the consequences. He brought letters from President Millard Fillmore, offering friendship but implying military force. Japan, bound by centuries of isolation and tradition, was stunned. The samurai were trained to face swords, arrows, and spears, not steam engines and cannons. Edo's leaders debated feverishly, fearful of foreign invasion but wary of surrendering sovereignty. The sight of the black ships, their engines thundering, smoke billowing, left an indelible mark on the Japanese psyche. These vessels were more than ships. They were symbols of a world that Japan had turned away from for generations. Tokugawa officials were forced to realize that isolation could no longer protect them. Modern warfare, diplomacy, and trade demanded engagement. By 1854, the shogunate signed the Convention of Kanagawa, opening limited ports to the Americans. Within a few years, treaties with Britain, Russia, and the Netherlands followed. The Tokugawa regime had survived centuries of internal conflict, but it now faced an unprecedented external pressure that challenged its authority, its tradition, and its very identity. The arrival of the black ships set in motion a chain of events that would shake Japan to its core. Economic changes, unequal treaties, and foreign influence fueled domestic unrest. Samurai who had once been warriors now found themselves debating politics, trade, and modernization. Farmers and merchants, once insulated, faced new taxes, new technologies, and foreign goods flooding markets. Factionalism intensified. Some advocated for embracing Western knowledge to strengthen Japan, the Kaikoku movement. Others demanded complete rejection of foreign influence, rallying under the slogan Sano Joy, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. This conflict between tradition and change tore at the fabric of Japanese society. The Tokugawa shogunate, once unchallenged, now appeared weak. Its rigid hierarchy could not adapt quickly to the modern world. Peasant uprisings, samurai protests, and political intrigue increased. The stage was set for the final act of feudal Japan. A revolution not of swords alone, but of ideas, nations, and generations. In essence, the arrival of the black ships marked the beginning of the end. Japan had lived in peace for over 2 centuries, insulated from the rest of the world. Now, it was forced to confront a reality that demanded transformation, modernity, and survival on a global stage. The winds of change, much like the kamikaze centuries before, would sweep the islands. But this time, there would be no divine intervention to turn back the tide. By the mid-19th century, the Tokugawa shogunate faced an unprecedented crisis. For over 250 years, Japan had remained isolated and orderly, But the arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships exposed vulnerabilities that the rigid shogunate could no longer hide. Political instability surged as samurai, peasants, and merchants all reacted differently to the changing world. Some demanded modernization, others clung desperately to tradition. The shogunate's authority, once absolute, began to erode. Daimyos who once respected Edo's authority now debated whether to defy the central government. Samurai, long the enforcers of Tokugawa control, found their power diluted and their stipends threatened by economic changes in foreign trade. Regional leaders, emboldened by the weakened shogunate, began to amass private armies and form coalitions, many secretly allied with the imperial court. Meanwhile, ideological movements flourished. The Sano-Joy faction, loyalists advocating the restoration of imperial power and expulsion of foreigners, gained momentum. Intellectuals, scholars, and young samurai debated the future of the nation, questioning the Tokugawa hierarchy and envisioning a Japan that could stand equal to Western powers. Newspapers, pamphlets, and public debates spread these ideas quickly, breaking centuries of controlled information. The shogunate attempted reforms to stabilize the nation, but they were half-hearted and inconsistent. They modernized the navy and allowed limited foreign trade, but corruption, factionalism, and slow adaptation undermined their efforts. The cracks in Tokugawa authority widened with every passing month, leaving the stage ready for a radical transformation. Amid growing unrest, the emperor, previously a symbolic figure under Tokugawa rule, became the rallying point for those who sought change. Young leaders, including the Satsuma and Choshu clans, recognized that national unity and modernization required a shift in power from the shogunate to the imperial court. They capitalized on the shogunate's failures, its inability to effectively manage foreign relations, control samurai uprisings, and integrate Western technology. By 1866, tensions had escalated into open conflict. The shogunate's army, composed mostly of traditional samurai units, struggled against more adaptable forces supported by modern firearms and foreign advisors. Battles like Toba Fushimi demonstrated the superiority of combined traditional and Western tactics, signaling the decline of Tokugawa military dominance. Political maneuvering was equally critical. Loyalist leaders emphasized the symbolic power of the emperor, portraying him as the legitimate source of authority while painting the shogun as weak and outdated. Propaganda, education, and appeals to national pride rallied provinces to the imperial cause. Samurai who once fought for the shogunate defected to the imperial side, seeing a future that balanced tradition with the necessity of modernization. Within a few years, the imperial faction strategy succeeded. Shogun Tokugawa Yoshinobu, facing inevitable defeat and widespread desertion, resigned in 1867, transferring nominal authority back to Emperor Meiji. The Tokugawa dynasty, once the unshakable rulers of Japan, had peacefully relinquished power, a symbolic victory for modernization, diplomacy, and the vision of a unified nation. The abdication of the shogunate marked the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, a period that would transform Japan from a feudal, isolated society into a modern, industrialized nation. Emperor Meiji, still young and inexperienced, relied on visionary leaders from former samurai clans to guide the country's rapid transformation. The restoration involved sweeping reforms. Feudal domains were abolished, and daimyos were replaced with governors appointed by the central government. Samurai lost their hereditary privileges and stipends, many transitioning into military or bureaucratic roles in a new national army and administration. Land taxes were standardized, and infrastructure projects modernized roads, ports and communication systems. Western technology and ideas were imported rapidly. Railroads connected distant provinces, telegraph lines sped communication, and modern schools taught mathematics, science, and foreign languages. Military modernization included conscription and the adoption of Western firearms and naval ships, ensuring Japan could defend itself on equal footing with foreign powers. Culturally, Japan also evolved. The influence of the samurai's ethical and educational legacy persisted, blending with new ideas to create a disciplined, nationalistic, and industrious society. Artists, scholars, and engineers thrived, combining Japanese tradition with modern techniques. By the end of the 19th century, Japan emerged as a unified, sovereign nation capable of standing among the great powers of the world. A remarkable transformation born from centuries of warfare, honor, and adaptability. The fall of the Tokugawa shogunate marked the end of feudal Japan. The samurai era had concluded, but its spirit, discipline, loyalty, and honor would continue to shape the identity of the nation for generations to come. Japan had survived isolation, internal chaos, foreign threats, and social upheaval. It had emerged stronger, unified, and modernized, ready to face the challenges of a new world. Though the samurai class was officially abolished during the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century, their values, discipline, and worldview did not vanish with the sheathing of swords. The ethical code, known as Bushido, the way of the warrior, became an enduring philosophical framework that influenced Japan's modernization and national identity. Bushido emphasized honor, loyalty, courage, and self-discipline, qualities that were adapted to the challenges of a rapidly changing world. In a new Japan, former samurai found ways to translate their martial skills into productive roles. Many became officers in the newly formed Imperial Japanese Army, bringing battlefield expertise and a sense of duty that shaped Japan's early modern military. Their dedication to discipline and hierarchy informed not only military training, but also the emerging bureaucracy as the government sought to organize a nation unified for industry, education, and defense. Bushido's principles permeated education and culture. Schools instilled values of loyalty, perseverance, and respect for authority, echoing the moral backbone of samurai ethics. Literature, poetry, and theater continued to celebrate samurai heroism, embedding their ideals in the collective memory of Japanese society. Stories of loyalty, self-sacrifice, and strategic brilliance were told to inspire the youth of a nation transitioning from feudalism to modernity. Even the concept of personal honor shaped social norms, from the business world to the arts. Japanese citizens learned to value diligence, ethical responsibility, and respect for hierarchy, all echoes of the samurai way. In essence, while swords no longer dictated life and death, the philosophy that guided those swords survived, molding generations long after the Edo period had ended. The samurai era also left an indelible mark on Japanese culture. The art, literature, and theater of Edo Japan continued to flourish, preserving the aesthetic sensibilities and disciplined creativity of warrior society. One of the most enduring forms was kabuki theater, which dramatized samurai exploits, moral dilemmas, and historical battles. These performances were more than entertainment. They were lessons in strategy, honor, and the consequences of ethical decisions. Another critical medium was ukiyo-e, the woodblock prints that captured both everyday life and heroic legends. Artists like Hokusai and Shiraku immortalized the aesthetic and martial culture of the samurai, blending realistic depictions of warriors with symbolic elements of philosophy and spirituality. Collectors, scholars, and common citizens alike studied these works, keeping samurai culture alive even as Japan modernized. Literature also preserved the samurai ethos. Novels, historical chronicles, and moral tales recounted the deeds of great warriors, emphasizing loyalty, intelligence, and moral integrity. Works such as Hagakure, written by Yamamoto Tsunetomo, explored the philosophy of living and dying as a samurai, providing guidance on ethics and self-discipline that resonated far beyond its era. Samurai wisdom became a moral touchstone for society, shaping the identity of Japan in both practical and spiritual ways. The influence of samurai culture was not merely historical. It continued to inform martial arts, governance, education, and even national policy, subtly guiding a country balancing tradition and modernity. The legacy of the samurai, carefully preserved through art and literature, became both a symbol of national pride and a blueprint for ethical conduct. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Japan had transformed into a modern nation-state, industrialized and militarized, yet still deeply connected to its samurai past. The values of Bushido were adapted into military training, emphasizing loyalty to the nation, courage under fire, and ethical conduct. Officers studied the exploits of legendary generals and the disciplined life of Edo samurai as part of their moral and strategic education. Beyond the military, the samurai ethos influenced politics, business, and education. Government officials applied principles of loyalty, hierarchical respect, and diligent service in administration. Merchants embraced discipline, perseverance, and ethical conduct, echoing the samurai ideal of responsible stewardship. Even ordinary citizens absorbed lessons from samurai stories, emphasizing integrity, courage, and resilience in daily life. Martial arts, such as kendo, judo, and karate gained popularity during this period, providing a physical and philosophical continuation of samurai training. Schools taught not only technique, but also the ethical and spiritual mindset of the warrior, a way to cultivate character, respect, and inner strength. These disciplines bridged centuries, connecting modern practitioners to the ethos of warriors long gone. In essence, while the Tokugawa shogunate had fallen and swords were no longer carried in daily life, the spirit of the samurai endured. Bushido, cultural traditions, and artistic expressions preserved their identity, ensuring that the moral, philosophical, and aesthetic contributions of centuries of warriors would continue to shape Japan. The samurai were gone as a class, but their legacy had become eternal, a guiding force in a nation navigating modernity while honoring the past. The dawn of the Meiji era in 1868 brought a wave of radical transformation to Japan. The nation that had been isolated under Tokugawa rule for over 2 centuries suddenly faced the challenge of modernization to avoid the fate of colonization. Inspired by Western powers, Emperor Meiji and his advisors launched an ambitious plan to industrialize, modernize infrastructure, and reform society. Japan became a laboratory of innovation where ancient tradition met cutting-edge technology. Factories began to rise across urban centers. Steam engines chugged along newly built railways connecting Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagasaki, while telegraph lines allowed rapid communication between distant provinces. Shipyards constructed Western-style naval vessels, and textile mills began producing cloth at industrial scales. This industrial awakening was driven by both necessity and ambition. Japan needed to strengthen its economy, military, and national infrastructure to compete with global powers. Former samurai played a critical role in this transformation. Though their swords were sheathed, their skills in discipline, leadership, and organization were invaluable. Many samurai became engineers, military officers, or bureaucrats. Their knowledge of strategy, hierarchy, and perseverance allowed them to lead industrial and military projects efficiently. Bushido's influence persisted. Diligence, honor, and loyalty were adapted to serve factories, schools, and government offices rather than battlefields. Education reforms were central to this industrial vision. Universal education was introduced, emphasizing literacy, mathematics, science, and foreign languages. Students were taught not only practical skills, but also the ethics inherited from samurai culture: obedience, moral integrity, and dedication to the state. Japan's leaders understood that knowledge, combined with the disciplined spirit of the samurai, was the key to survival in a world dominated by Western empires. As Japan modernized, the legacy of the samurai persisted most clearly in its military. The Meiji government abolished hereditary privileges but incorporated the strategic and ethical training of samurai into a national army. Universal conscription was introduced in 1873, requiring every young man to serve in the military, while officers were often drawn from former samurai families. The samurai ethic shaped the new army's code of conduct. Discipline, honor, courage, and loyalty to the emperor became foundational principles, echoing the values of Bushido. These principles were reinforced in training camps, military academies, and even in national ceremonies. Japan's rapid success in conflicts like the Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, and later the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, can be traced in part to the cultural continuity of the samurai ethos, now applied to modern strategy, firearms, and naval warfare. In governance, the former samurai proved equally influential. The newly centralized bureaucracy adopted a hierarchical, disciplined approach to administration. Provinces were reorganized under governors, tax systems were standardized, and legal codes were introduced. Former warriors, trained in loyalty, leadership, and precision, became administrators, educators, and local enforcers, ensuring the smooth implementation of reforms across Japan. The synthesis of samurai ethics with modern statecraft created a uniquely Japanese model of modernization. Unlike some nations that imported Western systems wholesale, Japan adapted them to its cultural context. Honor, loyalty, and discipline guided industrial expansion, education, governance, and the military, creating a cohesive national identity capable of rapid advancement without abandoning the moral foundations of its past. Modernization also transformed Japanese society, but the influence of samurai culture remained pervasive. Cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Yokohama became centers of industry, commerce, and education. Yet moral codes inherited from the warrior class guided everyday life. Discipline, self-restraint, and respect for authority informed both professional and personal conduct, maintaining social cohesion amid rapid change. The arts flourished alongside industrialization. Literature, painting, and theater incorporated Western techniques while preserving Japanese aesthetics. Ukiyo-e gave way to modern prints and paintings, and kabuki theater adapted contemporary themes, reflecting the tension between tradition and progress. Even architecture blended samurai-inspired symmetry and Western engineering, symbolizing Japan's unique path to modernity. National identity became closely tied to the idea of the disciplined, honorable citizen, a spiritual continuation of the samurai. Educational curricula emphasized patriotic duty, ethical conduct, and perseverance, preparing generations to support a strong, modern nation. Industrialists, bureaucrats, and soldiers alike were shaped by this ethos, creating a society where samurai values informed work, ethics, and governance, even in an age without swords. By the early 20th century, Japan had transformed into a powerful, industrialized nation capable of standing alongside Western empires. Its rapid rise was a testament to the synthesis of innovation and tradition. The technological and industrial advancements of modernity married seamlessly to the discipline, honor, and loyalty inherited from centuries of samurai culture. In essence, the warrior spirit lived on, not on battlefields, but in the hearts, minds, and actions of an entire nation. The Meiji era had transformed Japan into a centralized, industrialized state, but the lessons of the samurai remained deeply ingrained. Bushido, with its emphasis on discipline, loyalty, courage, and honor, became a guiding force in the newly modernized Japanese military. Officers, often drawn from former samurai families, instilled these values in soldiers, blending centuries-old philosophy with cutting-edge tactics, firearms, and naval technology. By the early 20th century, Japan's military prowess was evident. In the Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, Japan demonstrated not only superior weaponry, but also remarkable strategic planning and operational discipline. Troops adhered to strict codes of conduct, echoing the loyalty and courage that had defined samurai warriors for centuries. The success of these campaigns reinforced the idea that Japan could combine tradition with modernity, proving that the warrior ethos was not an artifact of the past, but a living tool for national success. During the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, the integration of samurai ethics into modern strategy became even more evident. Japanese soldiers were meticulously trained, demonstrating exceptional resilience and morale in the harsh conditions of Manchuria and at sea. Naval engagements, including the famous Battle of Tsushima, showcased Japan's ability to combine technological innovation with disciplined execution. Military leaders drew inspiration from historical samurai campaigns, analyzing battle tactics, psychological resilience, and battlefield honor, ensuring that Japan's modern army was as principled as it was effective. Bushido principles extended beyond battlefield tactics. They shaped the moral framework for officers and soldiers, creating a sense of duty not only to their country, but to each other. This camaraderie, rooted in centuries of samurai tradition, became a defining characteristic of Japan's military identity, setting it apart from other modernized armies of the era. While the military demonstrated the samurai's continued relevance in strategy and discipline, Japan also leveraged samurai culture as a tool of cultural diplomacy. The warrior ethos, combined with art, literature, and philosophy, became part of Japan's international identity. Japanese diplomats, educators, and cultural ambassadors highlighted the nation's disciplined character, moral integrity, and unique cultural heritage. Exhibitions showcased samurai armor, swords, and calligraphy, impressing Western audiences with both aesthetic sophistication and a moral narrative of honor and discipline. Kabuki theater, no performances, and traditional martial arts were promoted abroad as symbols of Japan's rich history, emphasizing a continuity between the country's past and its modern national identity. Educational initiatives abroad further reinforced this soft power. Japanese schools emphasized moral training alongside literacy and science, fostering citizens who embodied samurai virtues. The image of the samurai became intertwined with national pride, discipline, and ethical responsibility, creating a cultural brand that extended Japan's influence beyond mere economic or military might. This blending of tradition and modernity helped Japan navigate a complex global landscape. By showcasing the discipline and moral integrity derived from centuries of warrior culture, Japan positioned itself as a nation capable of sophisticated governance, industrious innovation, and principled international engagement. In essence, the samurai ethos became a bridge, linking Japan's ancient past to its emerging modern presence on the world stage. Despite its successes, the adaptation of the samurai ethos into modern military and cultural frameworks was not without contradictions. The principles of honor, loyalty, and courage that had guided warriors for centuries were sometimes applied in ways that created tension between tradition and the realities of modern warfare. For example, during World War II, the samurai-inspired ethos of absolute loyalty and self-sacrifice was emphasized in military training, particularly in the Navy and Air Force. Kamikaze pilots embodied the extreme interpretation of Bushido, sacrificing themselves for their country. While these acts were celebrated as ultimate loyalty and courage, they also reflected the dangers of rigid adherence to martial ethics when applied to modern conflict. The line between moral virtue and state-imposed duty blurred, revealing the potential consequences of transplanting centuries-old warrior codes into industrialized warfare. In civilian life, the samurai's moral and ethical lessons continued to shape education, business, and governance, but they also confronted challenges in a rapidly globalizing world. Balancing hierarchical obedience with innovation, duty with creativity, and honor with pragmatism became central to Japan's societal evolution. This tension between tradition and modernity defined much of Japan's journey through the 20th century, influencing its politics, culture, and international relations. Ultimately, the samurai legacy endured not merely as historical memory, but as a guiding force in Japan's transformation into a disciplined, innovative, and culturally distinct modern nation. The swords may have been sheathed, but the spirit that wielded them continued to shape the soul of a nation navigating unprecedented challenges and opportunities. Even as Japan industrialized and modernized during the Meiji and Taisho periods, the samurai's moral and philosophical legacy continued to shape literature and thought. The ethical framework of Bushido, emphasizing loyalty, courage, honor, and self-discipline, became central to Japanese storytelling, moral education, and philosophical discourse. Writers, historians, and philosophers drew inspiration from samurai principles to explore themes of personal integrity, social responsibility, and national identity. Literary works, such as Hagakure and various historical novels, became not only historical records, but ethical manuals. Authors depicted samurai facing impossible dilemmas, weighing loyalty to their lord against personal morality and balancing courage with prudence. These narratives resonated deeply with modern readers navigating the rapid social and economic changes of industrial Japan, offering models for ethical behavior in a rapidly evolving world. Philosophers examined the tension between traditional ethics and modern pragmatism. While industrialization demanded innovation, efficiency, and often ruthless competition, the samurai's ethical framework emphasized moderation, duty, and responsibility. Intellectuals argued that blending these approaches could create a society that was technologically advanced yet morally grounded, disciplined yet flexible. Schools and universities incorporated these discussions, ensuring that Bushido's principles remained alive in the moral education of young leaders, even as Western thought and technology became increasingly influential. The samurai ethic also influenced the concept of national identity. Japan's rise as a modern nation was framed not only in terms of industrial power or military success, but as a civilization that balanced ancient wisdom with modern innovation. Bushido became a cultural cornerstone, guiding both public morality and civic responsibility, bridging centuries of tradition with the demands of the contemporary era. Beyond literature and philosophy, the samurai legacy endured physically through the martial arts. Arts such as kendo, judo, karate, and aikido preserve techniques and philosophies of the warrior class, adapting them to modern education, sport, and self-discipline. These practices emphasized not only skill with weapons or unarmed combat, but the cultivation of character, patience, and moral responsibility. Kendo, for example, became more than swordplay. It was a rigorous moral and spiritual training. Practitioners were taught to respect opponents, act with integrity, and pursue mastery through perseverance. Similarly, judo, which emerged as a modernized martial art blending physical technique with ethical training, reflected the same principles: balance, control, and discipline. Training grounds in schools, universities, and community centers created a culture where physical education was inseparable from moral development, a direct inheritance from the samurai ethos. The martial arts also became a form of cultural diplomacy. Demonstrations of kendo or judo abroad introduced foreigners to Japanese discipline, tradition, and values, framing the samurai legacy as a source of both national pride and international admiration. Students of martial arts learned history alongside technique, connecting movements to centuries of warrior philosophy. Through these practices, the principles of honor, loyalty, and discipline were not only remembered, but actively embodied in modern Japanese society. Thus, the samurai's physical and ethical teachings continued to shape Japan in profound ways, providing both cultural continuity and practical guidance for life in a modern, industrialized world. The influence of the samurai extended beyond schools, literature, and martial arts. It became a defining element of Japan's national identity. Citizens, policymakers, and soldiers internalized the values of Bushido, integrating them into governance, military service, and civic duty. The ideal of self-discipline, loyalty to family and nation, and ethical behavior informed both individual conduct and institutional structures. During periods of national crisis, such as the Russo-Japanese War, World War I, and even the challenges of industrial and social reform, the samurai legacy provided a moral framework that guided decision-making and inspired resilience. The collective memory of disciplined warriors who sacrificed personal gain for the good of their lord or nation became a symbol of perseverance, courage, and unity. Artists, educators, and writers continued to celebrate samurai ideals as part of a shared heritage, ensuring that even ordinary citizens could draw inspiration from the ethos of honor and integrity. Traditional ceremonies, festivals, and public monuments commemorated samurai heroes, linking the past to the present and fostering a sense of historical continuity. By embedding the samurai ethos into every facet of society, military, education, art, philosophy, and governance, Japan created a national identity that was both modern and deeply rooted in tradition. The swords may have been long gone, but their spirit persisted, shaping a nation capable of facing modern challenges while remaining connected to centuries of cultural and ethical heritage. The end of Tokugawa isolation and the Meiji Restoration paved the way for a Japan that was no longer content to remain inward-looking. By the late 19th century, Japan recognized the necessity of engaging with global powers to protect its sovereignty and secure resources essential for modernization. Diplomatic missions, embassies, and treaties became central to Japan's strategy of national survival and expansion. The Iwakura Mission, 1871 to 1873, exemplified this effort. Led by prominent statesmen, including former samurai. This delegation traveled extensively to the United States and Europe, studying government structures, education systems, military organization, and industrial techniques. Their objective was to gather knowledge and technology to transform Japan into a competitive modern nation while safeguarding cultural identity. Every observation was analyzed through a lens of practicality and ethical guidance, reflecting the disciplined mindset inherited from samurai education. Treaties with Western powers, although initially unequal, provided Japan with the opportunity to integrate foreign knowledge and technology. Ports opened to international trade, Western-style infrastructure projects began, and industries adopted mechanization and modern management practices. Samurai-descended leaders, trained in both tradition and modern strategy, guided these reforms. Their disciplined approach ensured that Japan absorbed foreign influence without losing its national cohesion or moral foundation. Cultural exchange was not one-sided. Japan strategically showcased its own history, art, and philosophy, promoting its civilization as both sophisticated and morally disciplined. Samurai values, historical narratives, and artistic achievements became central to Japan's soft power abroad, allowing it to participate in global networks while maintaining a distinct cultural identity rooted in centuries of warrior ethos. Japan's engagement with the world was not limited to diplomacy. Trade and technology transfer became vital tools for modernization. Industrial machinery, railroads, telegraphs, and weapons technology were imported, studied, and adapted to Japanese needs. Ports like Yokohama, Kobe, and Nagasaki became bustling hubs of commerce, where foreign goods, ideas, and culture intermingled with Japanese tradition. The Meiji government organized technical schools and industrial workshops to train engineers, technicians, and bureaucrats, often under the guidance of former samurai who brought precision, discipline, and moral rigor to these programs. Factories produced textiles, steel, and arms at unprecedented scales, and Japanese entrepreneurs learned to merge efficiency with ethical responsibility, a reflection of Bushido's emphasis on diligence, loyalty, and careful stewardship. Japan also exported culture alongside technology. Samurai-inspired narratives, traditional arts, and martial disciplines were shared through exhibitions, performances, and publications abroad. This strategic cultural diplomacy reinforced Japan's image as a nation both modern and morally grounded, demonstrating that industrial progress need not erase historical identity. By integrating global technology with national values, Japan carved a path to modernization that was uniquely its own, a disciplined synthesis of innovation and tradition. Cultural and technological engagement allowed Japan to accelerate its transformation. Industrialization, military modernization, and education reforms created a resilient, capable society, ready to assert itself regionally and globally. The disciplined, strategic mindset inherited from the samurai class ensured that Japan's rapid modernization was sustainable, controlled, and ethically guided. As Japan interacted with the global community, the nation carefully curated its image abroad. Samurai culture, armor, swords, theater, literature, and martial arts became symbols of Japan's enduring moral and aesthetic traditions. These displays reinforced the notion that Japan was not merely adopting Western technology, but integrating it with a proud and sophisticated heritage. Kabuki, tea ceremonies, calligraphy, and martial arts were presented in exhibitions across Europe and America, establishing a form of cultural diplomacy that complemented political and economic engagement. Samurai stories, emphasizing honor, loyalty, and resilience, were translated and shared, inspiring fascination and respect. Japan's ability to maintain cultural continuity while embracing global modernization demonstrated the practical relevance of samurai ethics in a rapidly changing world. The influence of Bushido extended beyond diplomacy. It guided behavior in trade negotiations, public conduct, education, and military strategy, shaping a society that valued honor alongside progress. Japan's disciplined approach allowed it to interact with foreign powers on equal footing, fostering respect while asserting sovereignty. By blending moral integrity, strategic foresight, and cultural sophistication, Japan established itself as a modern nation capable of participating in global politics, trade, and cultural exchange without losing its historical identity. In essence, Japan's opening to the world was both pragmatic and philosophical. The lessons of the samurai, discipline, honor, loyalty, and ethical responsibility, provided the foundation for global engagement, allowing a nation long defined by isolation to enter the international stage with confidence, capability, and cultural pride. Even after the Meiji Restoration, when the samurai class was formally abolished, the principles of Bushido remained central to Japan's military ethos. Officers, many of whom descended from samurai families, instilled in their troops values such as loyalty, honor, courage, and self-discipline. Unlike European armies, which often emphasized technological superiority and tactical innovation alone, Japan's military stressed moral conduct, personal integrity, and devotion to duty as equally important components of effectiveness. Training programs incorporated both modern strategies and ethical education. Soldiers were taught not only how to use firearms, artillery, and naval equipment, but also how to embody virtues like perseverance under adversity and absolute loyalty to superiors and the emperor. These lessons were rooted in centuries of samurai culture, linking contemporary warfare to historical precedents of discipline, strategy, and ethical decision-making. The military's adherence to Bushido became particularly pronounced in the early 20th century. During the Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, Japanese troops demonstrated exceptional resilience and morale, often holding positions against numerically superior forces. The dedication, courage, and disciplined organization displayed on the battlefield were a direct continuation of samurai values applied to modern warfare. Officers frequently cited historical samurai campaigns as teaching tools, emphasizing strategic foresight, ethical conduct, and collective responsibility. Moreover, Bushido influenced the broader perception of military service in Japanese society. Serving in the army was considered both a duty and an honor, reinforcing civic responsibility and national identity. The samurai ethic had evolved into a moral framework for modern citizens, blending ancient values with contemporary needs, shaping the mindset of soldiers, policymakers, and ordinary citizens alike. Bushido's influence extended beyond the military, shaping social behavior, education, and civic engagement. Schools emphasized moral development alongside literacy, mathematics, and science. Young Japanese were taught virtues such as diligence, integrity, loyalty, and respect for authority, traits rooted in the samurai's ethical system. The objective was to create citizens capable of contributing to a strong, unified nation where personal conduct aligned with national interests. In business and governance, former samurai descendants applied the same principles of discipline, honor, and responsibility that had guided warriors for centuries. Industrialists, bureaucrats, and educators internalized a moral framework emphasizing ethical decision-making, careful planning, and commitment to collective welfare. Japanese corporations often stressed teamwork, loyalty to the company, and rigorous work ethics, reflecting the adaptation of samurai discipline to modern economic life. Public ceremonies, Commemorations and historical narratives also reinforced the enduring presence of samurai ethics. Monuments honoring heroic warriors, festivals celebrating martial history, and literary works extolling ethical conduct kept the samurai ethos alive in the collective consciousness. By embedding these values into daily life, Japan ensured that the lessons of Bushido continued to influence behavior, shaping both individual identity and national character in the modern era. The combination of historical continuity and modern adaptation created a uniquely Japanese social fabric. Citizens were encouraged to balance personal ambition with moral duty, innovation with respect for hierarchy, and individual success with collective responsibility. This integration of ancient samurai ethics with contemporary societal demands enabled Japan to navigate modernization while maintaining a coherent moral and cultural identity. The samurai legacy profoundly shaped Japan's national identity. Even as cities modernized, industries expanded, and foreign influence grew, the values of honor, courage, loyalty, and discipline provided a moral compass. Civic pride, ethical behavior, and social responsibility were reinforced by historical narratives of samurai heroism, ethical decision-making, and strategic wisdom. During periods of national crisis, such as wars, economic challenges, or political transitions, these values offered guidance and inspiration. Citizens and leaders drew upon the samurai ethos to frame public discourse, organize collective efforts, and maintain resilience in the face of adversity. Cultural expressions, including literature, theater, martial arts, and visual arts, celebrated these ideals, ensuring that the moral backbone of society remained tied to historical precedent. The adaptation of Bushido also had a symbolic dimension. It connected contemporary Japan to a long historical lineage, legitimizing the nation's modernization and global engagement. By framing industrialization, military prowess, and international diplomacy within a moral framework derived from samurai ethics, Japan asserted that progress did not require abandoning tradition. Instead, tradition could guide progress, providing stability, ethical clarity, and national cohesion. In essence, the samurai class may have disappeared as a social institution, but its values became foundational to the modern Japanese state and society. The lessons of Bushido, discipline, loyalty, courage, and honor, permeated military strategy, civic life, business ethics, and cultural identity. They created a nation capable of rapid modernization while retaining a moral compass anchored in centuries of warrior tradition. Japan's path into the 20th century was thus both innovative and deeply rooted, a testament to the enduring power of samurai influence. The samurai legacy has remained a rich source of inspiration for Japanese literature for over a century. Authors from the Meiji period to contemporary writers have drawn upon the history, ethics, and drama of the warrior class to explore themes of honor, loyalty, courage, and moral conflict. These narratives often depict the samurai grappling with personal dilemmas, balancing duty to a lord, family, or nation against conscience, ambition, and survival. Classical works, such as Hagakure and historical novels set in the Sengoku or Edo periods, provide insight into the psychological and moral universe of the samurai. Later authors, like Yoshikawa Eiji, adapted historical events into sweeping epic novels, blending meticulous historical research with literary imagination. His retellings of legendary warriors, battles, and political intrigue captured not only historical facts, but also the ethical frameworks that guided samurai decisions. In addition, contemporary Japanese literature continues to reinterpret samurai themes for modern audiences. Writers examine the tension between individual desire and collective duty, explore moral ambiguity, and connect historical values to contemporary social and ethical questions. Manga and graphic novels, which reach millions of readers globally, often center on samurai characters or warrior-inspired archetypes, blending history, fantasy, and ethical exploration. These stories preserve the moral and cultural resonance of the samurai while adapting their appeal to the sensibilities of new generations. By embedding samurai narratives into literature, Japan ensures that the ethical and philosophical essence of Bushido continues to influence modern thought. Readers internalize lessons of discipline, loyalty, and courage, seeing them not as relics of a bygone era, but as living ideals applicable to both personal growth and societal engagement. Literature, thus, serves as a bridge between historical reality and modern cultural consciousness. The samurai legacy has transcended Japanese borders, captivating global audiences through literature, cinema, video games, and digital media. Western fascination with the samurai began during Japan's opening in the 19th century, but it intensified with the international release of Japanese films and stories in the 20th century. Audiences were drawn not only to the visual spectacle of battle, but to the ethical and philosophical depth of Bushido. Video games, such as Ghost of Tsushima and numerous historical strategy games, allow players to embody samurai warriors, making decisions that balance honor, strategy, and survival. These interactive experiences transmit the moral and tactical dimensions of samurai culture to a global, digitally engaged audience, blending entertainment with historical immersion. Literature, both fiction and nonfiction, continues to explore samurai philosophy, emphasizing the relevance of discipline, loyalty, and ethical reflection in contemporary life. The samurai ethos also informs martial arts communities worldwide. Kendo, Aikido, and Judo practitioners study both technique and philosophical principles, learning not only combat skills, but ethical reasoning, patience, and discipline. Martial arts schools emphasize respect for tradition, character development, and moral responsibility, echoing the same virtues that defined samurai life centuries ago. In essence, the samurai have become universal symbols of discipline, courage, and moral clarity. Their stories, philosophies, and cultural representations continue to inspire people worldwide, demonstrating that the principles forged in feudal Japan remain relevant and compelling even in a globalized, modern context. The legacy of the samurai, therefore, is not only a national treasure, but a shared cultural heritage that transcends time and geography. The practical legacy of the samurai is most visibly preserved in the martial arts. Disciplines such as kendo, judo, karate, aikido, and aikido are not merely combat techniques, but structured educational systems designed to cultivate both physical skill and moral character. Unlike modern sports that prioritize competition and athleticism alone, these martial arts integrate centuries of philosophical wisdom derived from the samurai tradition. Practitioners learn precision, timing, balance, and strategy while internalizing the ethical principles of Bushido: honor, courage, loyalty, and respect. In contemporary Japan, martial arts are incorporated into school programs, university curricula, and community centers. Students begin with basic techniques, but are progressively taught ethical reasoning, patience, and self-control. They are instructed to respect instructors, peers, and opponents, emphasizing character development over mere physical ability. This holistic approach mirrors the samurai method of training, in which mastery of technique and refinement of the self were inseparable. The global spread of these disciplines has further enhanced their influence. Schools and dojos worldwide teach martial arts in a manner faithful to traditional values, blending physical training with ethical education. Students from diverse cultures learn the same principles that guided samurai warriors: disciplined practice, humility, accountability, and a commitment to moral integrity. Through these practices, samurai ethics transcend their historical context, continuing to shape behavior, mindset, and personal development across continents. Moreover, martial arts serve as a framework for conflict resolution, emotional control, and leadership development. Leaders, educators, and athletes worldwide draw inspiration from Bushido, applying its principles to competitive sports, corporate environments, and personal relationships. In this sense, the samurai's educational philosophy remains a living, dynamic influence in modern society, blending tradition, practicality, and ethical formation. Beyond physical training, the philosophical aspects of Bushido have permeated modern Japanese society, influencing professional conduct, civic responsibility, and personal ethics. Principles like giri, duty, ninjo, human compassion, and makoto, sincerity, are derived from samurai thought and continue to shape decision-making in business, education, and governance. Employees, students, and officials are often guided by a balance of ethical responsibility and practical efficiency, a reflection of centuries-old samurai wisdom adapted to contemporary contexts. This integration of philosophy into daily life extends to personal behavior and societal norms. Individuals are encouraged to cultivate self-discipline, honor commitments, and act with integrity, while society rewards those who demonstrate loyalty, diligence, and courage in professional, civic, and familial contexts. The moral framework of Bushido thus reinforces social cohesion, providing ethical guidance in an increasingly complex and competitive modern world. Moreover, contemporary thinkers, educators, and psychologists often draw upon samurai philosophy to explore the balance between self-mastery and social responsibility. Bushido encourages a deep awareness of personal strength and limitation, fostering reflective and principled action. Individuals are taught to confront challenges with resilience, to value collective well-being alongside personal achievement, and to navigate moral dilemmas with integrity. All lessons rooted in centuries of samurai practice. Philosophical seminars, literature, and workshops on Bushido have gained popularity, both in Japan and internationally, as a resource for character education, leadership training, and personal development. In these forums, the samurai legacy transcends history, functioning as a timeless guide for ethical living, decision-making, and interpersonal conduct. The global reach of samurai martial arts and philosophy demonstrates the universality of their principles. Dojos in North America, Europe, and Asia teach kendo, judo, karate, and aikido with a focus on both technique and ethics, emphasizing respect, discipline, and moral clarity. Martial arts tournaments, workshops, and cultural festivals showcase the samurai legacy, blending physical skill with ethical and philosophical engagement. Cultural exchange programs, international competitions, and online platforms allow practitioners to study the historical, ethical, and spiritual dimensions of samurai culture. Students not only refine physical techniques, but also explore historical narratives, ethical dilemmas, and strategic thinking, connecting modern practice to historical roots. This globalized approach ensures that the samurai legacy remains both relevant and accessible, transmitting moral and cultural values across generations and national boundaries. In professional, educational, and even corporate environments, the principles derived from Bushido guide leadership, teamwork, and ethical decision-making. Organizations adopt samurai-inspired training programs to instill discipline, perseverance, and loyalty in employees, reflecting the adaptability of centuries-old ethics to modern challenges. By blending physical rigor, ethical reasoning, and strategic thinking, samurai martial arts and philosophy continue to shape not only individual development, but also collective behavior, community standards, and global cultural understanding. In essence, the samurai legacy is far from static. It is an evolving, dynamic force that continues to influence education, ethics, and culture worldwide. Through martial arts, philosophical reflection, and global exchange, the principles of Bushido, honor, discipline, loyalty, and courage, remain as vital today as they were centuries ago, proving that the spirit of the samurai endures in both practice and principle. The enduring influence of the samurai is most evident in Japan's moral and ethical framework. Even as the country became a modern industrial power, the principles of Bushido, honor, loyalty, courage, self-discipline, and duty continued to shape individual and collective behavior. These values were transmitted not only through historical education and literature, but also through social customs, civic rituals, and professional expectations. In modern Japanese society, the ethics inherited from the samurai guide behavior in numerous contexts. Public officials, educators, and business leaders emphasize responsibility, integrity, and accountability in decision-making, reflecting centuries of moral reasoning derived from Bushido. Schools integrate lessons on ethical behavior, civic responsibility, and self-discipline alongside academic knowledge, instilling these values in future generations. The samurai ethos has thus become a moral scaffolding, supporting the development of individuals who are disciplined, conscientious, and socially responsible. The historical narratives of samurai heroism also serve as examples of resilience and strategic thinking. Stories of warriors facing overwhelming odds, sacrificing personal comfort for the good of their lord or nation, and navigating complex ethical dilemmas resonate deeply with modern citizens. These narratives provide a moral compass for contemporary challenges, from business ethics to civic engagement, encouraging individuals to balance personal ambition with collective responsibility. Bushido's emphasis on courage, endurance, and loyalty also influences national crisis response. Whether in natural disasters, economic challenges, or social upheavals, Japanese citizens demonstrate collective resilience rooted in a historical understanding of duty and honor. The samurai legacy thus informs both personal behavior and national character, bridging historical tradition with modern societal needs. The samurai ethos has helped create a society characterized by strong social cohesion, respect for authority, and civic responsibility. In modern Japan, these principles manifest in daily life, from punctuality and discipline in workplaces to the structured, respectful interactions among citizens. The moral lessons of Bushido emphasize harmony, respect for others, and ethical action, encouraging individuals to act in ways that support community well-being. Community festivals, historical commemorations, and martial arts demonstrations continue to reinforce the cultural memory of the samurai. These events celebrate ethical conduct, courage, and strategic wisdom, linking contemporary civic life to historical values. For example, local festivals honoring samurai heroes or historic battles often include educational programs, reenactments, and public lectures, ensuring that the ethical lessons of the past remain accessible and relevant. Even the corporate and professional sectors reflect the influence of samurai ethics. Japanese companies often emphasize teamwork, loyalty, meticulous attention to detail, and ethical conduct. Employees are expected to fulfill duties conscientiously, act with integrity, and support collective goals, reflecting the disciplined mindset that guided samurai warriors. This integration of historical values into everyday life fosters social stability, strengthens national identity, and reinforces the connection between tradition and modern societal organization. Through civic engagement, education, and social rituals, the principles of the samurai continue to shape modern Japan. They provide a framework for ethical behavior, collective responsibility, and resilience, helping the nation navigate the complexities of contemporary life while maintaining a sense of historical continuity. The samurai legacy also serves as a cornerstone of Japan's cultural memory and national identity. Historical sites, museums, literature, films, and educational curricula preserve the stories, ethics, and philosophies of the warrior class, ensuring that citizens maintain a connection to their historical roots. Samurai figures are celebrated as paragons of virtue, discipline, and strategic wisdom, embodying ideals that continue to resonate in both personal and national narratives. Modern Japanese identity balances innovation, industrial achievement, and global engagement with reverence for historical ethical frameworks. Bushido provides a moral and psychological anchor, allowing citizens to reconcile rapid social, technological, and economic changes with a coherent sense of self and community. This continuity between past and present fosters a resilient national identity capable of adapting to global challenges without losing sight of ethical principles and cultural heritage. Moreover, Japan's global cultural presence, through cinema, literature, martial arts, and technology, often emphasizes the discipline, honor, and ethical clarity associated with the samurai. International audiences recognize these values as defining elements of Japanese culture, enhancing Japan's soft power while preserving the moral and philosophical contributions of Bushido. In this way, the legacy of the samurai transcends history, influencing national identity, societal ethics, and international perceptions in profound and lasting ways. By integrating ethics, historical consciousness, and cultural pride, the samurai legacy remains a living force in modern Japan. It provides a moral compass, shapes social cohesion, and sustains a resilient national identity, ensuring that the values forged in feudal Japan continue to guide the nation in the 21st century. The samurai legacy has persisted far beyond the battlefields of feudal Japan, embedding itself into the ethical, cultural, and social fabric of modern society. The principles of Bushido, including honor, courage, loyalty, self-discipline, and ethical responsibility, continue to inform individual behavior, professional conduct, and national identity. Modern Japan, with its emphasis on social cohesion, moral responsibility, and disciplined work ethic, reflects these enduring values. Bushido's influence is evident in education, where students learn not only academic subjects, but also ethical principles rooted in centuries-old warrior traditions. Civic engagement, respect for authority, teamwork, and collective responsibility all bear the imprint of the samurai ethos. Historical narratives and cultural practices, such as festivals, literature, and martial arts, reinforce these values, connecting citizens to their cultural heritage while promoting practical moral guidance. The continuity of these ethical frameworks demonstrates that the samurai legacy is not merely historical or symbolic. It has evolved into a living moral and cultural code, adaptable to modern contexts. Business practices, military discipline, and civic responsibility in Japan are shaped by this ethos, showing that values forged in feudal hierarchies can remain relevant in a globalized, technologically advanced society. Even in daily life, the principles of honor, integrity, and perseverance guide behavior. Citizens internalize lessons of loyalty, courage, and self-discipline, creating a society that emphasizes ethical conduct, accountability, and mutual respect. In this sense, the samurai continue to serve as moral exemplars, their historical narratives informing contemporary social expectations and personal development. The impact of the samurai extends far beyond Japan's borders, inspiring fascination and admiration across the globe. International audiences encounter samurai culture through films, literature, video games, and martial arts, all of which communicate the ethical and philosophical dimensions of the warrior class. Works such as Akira Kurosawa's films, samurai novels, and contemporary digital media allow global audiences to engage with the principles of Bushido, witnessing the combination of strategy, honor, and moral deliberation that define samurai life. Martial arts have become a significant conduit for cultural exchange. Kendo, judo, karate, and aikido are practiced worldwide, not only teaching combat skills, but also ethical principles, discipline, and respect. Students learn to integrate moral reasoning, self-control, and perseverance with physical training, reflecting the holistic nature of samurai education. International competitions, workshops, and dojos provide platforms for cross-cultural appreciation and philosophical exploration, demonstrating that the values of the samurai are universally applicable. Literature and gaming also transmit samurai ethics globally. Interactive experiences allow participants to make strategic and ethical decisions modeled on Bushido, immersing them in historical context while teaching moral reasoning, resilience, and problem solving. By blending education, entertainment, and ethical reflection, these cultural products ensure that the legacy of the samurai continues to inspire, instruct, and captivate audiences worldwide. Through these channels, the samurai have become symbols of disciplined courage, moral clarity, and strategic thinking, values that resonate universally. Their ethical, philosophical, and cultural influence transcends time and geography, demonstrating the enduring relevance of a warrior class that once dominated Japan's feudal landscape. The enduring legacy of the samurai highlights a powerful lesson. History is not only about events, but also about ideas, ethics, and cultural frameworks. The samurai exemplify how moral codes, disciplined practices, and strategic thinking can influence societies across centuries, shaping behavior, institutions, and collective identity. Their philosophy continues to guide individuals, organizations, and nations, providing a model for balancing tradition with innovation, honor with practicality, and duty with personal development. In Japan, the samurai ethos contributes to a coherent national identity, one that combines historical pride with modern achievement. Citizens draw inspiration from narratives of ethical courage and disciplined service, integrating these lessons into civic, professional, and personal life. Globally, the principles of Bushido resonate with diverse audiences seeking models of ethical behavior, resilience, and strategic acumen. Culturally, the samurai serve as a bridge between the past and present, illustrating how values forged in one historical era can remain relevant in an entirely different world. Martial arts, literature, film, and educational programs ensure that the ethical and philosophical dimensions of samurai culture continue to thrive. They demonstrate that courage, honor, and discipline are not confined to battlefield contexts, but can guide behavior, decision-making, and creativity in everyday life. Ultimately, the samurai legacy is a testament to the power of ideas and ethics to endure across centuries. From the castles and battlefields of feudal Japan to modern classrooms, corporate offices, and global stages, the spirit of the samurai remains vibrant, guiding individuals and societies toward disciplined, ethical, and honorable lives. The swords may be sheathed, but their influence endures, a timeless beacon of moral courage, strategic wisdom, and cultural resilience. And that concludes our journey through the epic story of the samurai. Today, you've discovered how these legendary warriors not only master the battlefield, but also shape the culture, philosophy, and moral fabric of Japan. Lessons that still resonate in modern society. From the rise of feudal lords and the enforcement of the Bushido code, to Japan's encounter with modernization, diplomacy, and global influence, the story of the samurai teaches us timeless values. Honor, discipline, loyalty, courage, and ethical integrity. If you've enjoyed uncovering the strategies, philosophies, and cultural legacies of the samurai, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon, because on History Teller YT, we bring history alive. Every sword, every story, every lesson. Thank you for joining us today, and remember, the courage and wisdom of the past can guide us in the present. Stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you again in the next journey through history.